The 1994 Rwandan genocide has been called one of the darkest periods in human history, and the United States and other Western powers have been accused of standing by and letting it happen.
So what have we learned since? That is a question U.S. authorities are still debating, as VOA's Kent Klein told On Assignment's Alexiou. And we do need to tell you, this segment contains graphic images some may find disturbing.
The world was shocked when an estimated 800,000 Rwandans were massacred in about 100 days, starting April 7, 1994. Members of the ethnic Hutu majority killed about 70% of the minority Tutsis living in Rwanda and many moderate Hutus. U.S. President Bill Clinton was criticized at home and abroad for doing nothing to stop the slaughter.
Ken, when President Clinton 4 years later after the genocide, when he went back in 1998, what was he essentially trying to accomplish? It was a worldwide denial of what was happening, or at least not getting involved to stop it.
It was, and the U.S. had actually gone to great lengths to avoid calling it genocide, because for a number of reasons the U.S. just didn't want to get involved. And President Clinton, when he went there, apologized.
We did not act quickly enough after the killing began. But all over the world, there were people like me sitting in offices day after day after day who did not fully appreciate the depth and the speed with which you were being engulfed by this unimaginable terror.
I think after he left office a few years later, he had said that the Rwanda genocide was the greatest regret of his presidency, and especially that he didn't actively get involved.
And of course, the rest of the world didn't either.
That's true. There was very little action from the UN. There was a UN peacekeeping force, but really not any peace to keep, and it didn't receive a great deal of support.
Now, you mentioned in your report that there is this sort of, if you will, quote, "Despite the vow of never again, the catastrophe in Rwanda did not bring the end of widespread violence against civilians." So, and yet it continued.
And there remains, to this day, some ethnic tension between the Hutus and Tutsis, but Rwanda has recovered to a great degree, and Kigali is a financial center today and has a very active and very prosperous stock market, and at least, if not completely in a human rights sense, at least in a financial sense, in an economic sense, Rwanda has made a tremendous amount of progress over 20 years.
So that certainly seems to be not coincidental that I guess the violence has been, tampered down quite
Exactly,
a bit.
yeah.
Right?
That had to happen first. In those 100 days in 1994, 20% of the population was killed, and it was just a mass killing on a level that was rarely seen.
Do you think the United States, at least under this administration, when it comes to this sort of thing, is more reluctant now after the two wars and the war-weary country?
Well, I think so. That's not to say that there is no situation under which the United States would get involved, but Americans are getting tired of military interventions, of sending their boys and young women overseas to fight in situations that they feel perhaps could be avoided by other means.
Veteran U.S. diplomat Johnny Carson, now a senior advisor at the U.S. Institute for Peace, says the Rwanda genocide taught the world it has to move quickly.
Act swiftly and to muster the resources of the international community to condemn and engage as quickly as possible when we see an atrocity about to occur.
Ambassador Carson says the lessons of Rwanda and other massacres led President Barack Obama to establish an Atrocities Prevention Board,
which is an interagency group that gets together once a month under the direction of the National Security Council to review situations around the world that may be likely to turn into atrocities or mass violence.
What has the world learned from this atrocity?
There are limits to what can be done, but I think the consensus is that more is being done, although apparently not enough.
All right, and that was VOA's Kent Klein talking with our very own Philip Alexiou. And on the issue of justice for victims of the Rwandan genocide, Human Rights Watch says the record is mixed, and many Rwandans note that since 1995, an international tribunal created to judge these high-level killers has delivered only 49 convictions out of 95 indictments.
Incredible.